Don't throw donuts at old people. Hello, my name is Legia. I'm a real-life lawyer, and I'm on a mission to demystify the law and how it affects your everyday life. Happy spooky season. It's my favorite time of year, so obviously the spooky episodes of The Simpsons are also my favorite episodes of The Simpsons. So in honor of spooky season, I'd like to do a Halloween-themed episode of Lawyer Reacts to The Simpsons. Let's get spooky. Alright, I found this list on the internet from InsideHook.com. It's the 30 best Simpsons Treehouse of Horror segments ranked. So according to this website, the #1 Halloween-themed Simpsons segment is The Devil and Homer Simpson from Treehouse of Horror 4 in 1993. Homer sells his soul to the devil, and I can almost guarantee you there's going to be a court scene. Let's watch.
Sorry, Homer. While you were daydreaming, we ate all the donuts.
Well, there were a few left, but we chucked them at an old man for kicks.
Buzzards! I ain't dead yet!
Not only is it probably an actual crime to throw donuts at old people, but that old person could probably sue them for battery. That's right, you don't have to actually physically hit anyone to be found guilty of battery. You could throw a donut at them, and if it hits their person, and you threw it intentionally, you might have to pay them some money in civil court. Don't throw donuts at old people.
I'd sell my soul for a donut.
Well, that can be arranged.
Flanders! You're the devil?
It's always the one you least suspect. Many people offer to sell their souls without reflecting upon the grave ramifications.
Do you have a donut or not?
Coming up, just sign here. Careful, hot pen.
Who's that goat-legged fellow? I like the cut of his jib.
Prince of Darkness, sir. He's your 11 o'clock.
Forbidden donut.
One of those notes says, Daddy's soul donut.
Well.
Wait, doesn't my father have the right to a fair trial?
Oh, you Americans with your due process and fair trials. This is always so much easier in Mexico. All right, very well. We'll have the trial tomorrow at the stroke of midnight. Till then, you're going to spend the day in hell!
You heard the devil mention the American obsession with due process, which we've talked about a lot in other videos, so go ahead and click up here if you want to learn more about due process. But basically, due process is protected under the 5th Amendment for the federal government and the 14th Amendment in the states. It basically says that no person will have their life, liberty, or property taken away from them without due process of law. Within due process, there's substantive and procedural due process. I'm not going to get into that. It is true in America that we have a very long history and a deep-rooted sense of due process, both in our legal system and embodied in our Constitution.
Homer, are you all right?
No.
Mr. Simpson, don't you worry. I watched Matlock in a bar last night. The sound wasn't on, but I think I got the gist of it.
Hear ye, hear ye. The Court of Infernal Affairs is now in session.
Very well. But first, some ground rules. Number 1, we get bathroom breaks every half hour.
Agreed. Number 2, the jury will be chosen by me.
Agreed. No, wait.
Silence!
So the judge sits down and hits his gavel and says, "Hear ye, court is now in session." Usually that's someone else that yells it, and they say, hear ye, the court of so-and-so is now in session. All rise for the Honorable Judge so-and-so. Everyone stands up, the judge walks out and says, please be seated, and then everyone sits down. It's usually not the judge themselves that announce themselves. Also, I don't know a ton about state court, but in federal court, gavels are really uncommon. I think I've seen one judge whose clerk would use a gavel when announcing her presence, but otherwise, there are no gavels being hit constantly in courts. So in terms of choosing a jury, people are entitled to a jury of their peers of between 6 and 12 jurors, depending on the statute and whatever court you're in. Typically, the way that juries are selected is you bring in a large pool of people from the area that are called in for jury duty. You get the thing in the mail, and then you show up. And then there's a series of questions that have been established earlier before the jurors showed up, where the sides each submit what's called a voir dire. Voir dire? I don't know. It's another one of those legal terms that lawyers don't actually pronounce properly. So a voir dire is a set of questions that each side submits to the court that they would like asked to potential jurors. This is how they're able to tell if any of the jurors have any potential biases, any conflicts of interest, any connection to the case that would make them unable to make a unbiased decision. And so they slowly weed out the jurors using those questions, but it is a process that both sides are a part of. A fun story is that my first internship that I had while I was in law school, I showed up, I was being shown around to all the attorneys that worked in the office, meeting them, saying hello, and one of them was like, "Hi, you want to do a voir dire for me?" And I had no idea what it was, and I was like, "Yep, I do." And then proceeded to panic for a while until I realized it was just a list of questions, but that's what it is. So now you don't have to go through what I did. So then each side gets what are called peremptory challenges, where each side gets a certain number of times they can remove a juror without cause. So they don't need to show that they have bias for any reason. They can just say, we just don't want that person. However, these peremptory challenges cannot be used to remove jurors solely based on race or class, but otherwise these peremptory challenges give each side free rein to remove the jurors that they, for whatever reason, might think, even though they don't have an explicit bias or something to point to, they just think that this person is just not going to be sympathetic to their side. So each side gets that. And that's the way that we maintain kind of equality in the jury selection process.
I hold here a contract between myself and one Homer Simpson, pledging me his soul for a donut, which I delivered, and it was scrum-diddly-umptious. I simply asked for what is mine.
That was a right pretty speech, sir. But I ask you, what is a contract? Webster's defines it as an agreement under the law which is unbreakable. Which is unbreakable.
Homer Simpson, I have no choice but to sentence you to an eternity.
Wait! Before you send him to hell, there's something you should see. That's a photo of Homer and me at our wedding. Read the back! The back!
Dear Marge, you have given me your hand in marriage. All I can give you in return is my soul, which I pledge to you forever.
We've heard enough. Your Honor, we find that Homer Simpson's soul is legally the property of Marge Simpson and not of the devil.
No.
This is a civil issue of contract law. When you sign a contract, you become legally bound by the terms of that contract, and if you break the terms of that contract, the other signer or signers of that contract can sue you, either for specific performance, meaning that you have to fulfill what you promised you would in the contract, or to rescind the contract, meaning that the contract is canceled and both parties are put back in the position as though the contract was never formed. Here, what Flanders wants, or the devil wants, is specific performance. He wants Homer's soul because that's what he signed for. And you can contract away a lot of things. Even if there's a law that says you have a certain right or you own a certain thing, if you sign a contract with someone, most laws you can kind of overwrite via contract. Not criminal laws, but other types of laws you can contract away. You can just say, this property that I own is now yours, and sign it, and that's it. So if someone breaks a promise that they made to you in a contract, you sue them in civil court, you bring them before a judge. The judge or a jury, if it goes to trial, will interpret the contract and see whether or not a breach occurred and then give damages accordingly. However, there are certain instances in where a contract will not be enforceable, especially contracts that are what's called unconscionable, meaning that enforcing the contract would not make equitable sense. So there are a number of things that courts look to determine whether or not a term of a contract is unconscionable. Here the question would be, is the exchange of a donut for Homer's soul a conscionable exchange? Was there something that in the creation of that contract that would make it unenforceable? So some things that make contracts unconscionable include undue influence or uneven bargaining power. So if one party has control or more power over another party such that enforcing a contract between the two would be unjust. This is especially where it's evident that one party knew that the other party didn't understand the kind of contract they were entering into and took advantage of that by entering into a contract with them. There's also duress, where one party threatens the other party in order to get them to enter into a contract. There's unfair surprise, where one party includes a term in the contract that they knew the other person didn't know about, or that was outside of the other person's expectations. So basically anywhere where you have a contract where one party has power or the other party signs unwittingly onto something that they didn't realize they were signing, there's going to be unconscionability there. And that would be something that the person who breached the contract would come in front of the court and say, yes, I breached, but this contract is unconscionable and therefore unenforceable. Here, I don't think Homer would have that argument because it's a donut. The devil didn't threaten him. He could maybe argue that the power dynamic was different. I mean, it's the devil versus him. That could be, but there doesn't seem to have been any sort of duress or undue influence in this situation. Homer knew what he was getting into. There was a written contract that he could have read and he signed. Here, being unenforceable due to unconscionability doesn't look like it would be a good argument. The fact that a soul and a donut are really unequal in most people's eyes doesn't usually matter. So there's this thing in contract law called consideration. Basically, each side to a contract has to give consideration in order for the contract to be enforceable. So each side has to give something, do something, promise something in order for it to be a valid contract. So in this situation, the consideration would be the devil is giving Homer a donut, so his consideration is giving up the donut, and Homer, in exchange for receiving the donut, is giving his soul. So his soul is the consideration. So Homer's consideration, his soul, the devil's consideration, the donut. However, adequate consideration is not a thing that courts will look at, meaning they're not going to compare what one person gave in consideration and what the other person gave in consideration and say they're unequal and rule in any way that way. Basically, the reason for this is because you as a person entering into a contract, you are expected to do your due diligence to know what you're signing up for. You can't just rescind a contract because you realize afterwards that, oh, the value of what you gave was more than the value that this other person gave. So it's not really an option for you to go to court and say, well, it's not fair that I only got a donut and he eats my soul. That's not going to be a valid argument here. Where a contract is unconscionable because of undue influence and things like that, that comes into play a little bit. But when two people knowingly enter into a contract and there isn't any sort of power imbalance or undue influence of any sort, and the contract is enforceable, it's going to be enforced even if it's an unequal exchange. There are some exceptions to this, but for our purposes today, that's the point. Homer can't go into court and say, well, it's not fair. So otherwise, this scene does mirror a trial to a certain extent. Basically, after the judge announces the case, each side will be able to take their turn to stand up in front of the jury and state their case. So at the beginning of every trial, one side goes up, says, here's the issue, here's what I'm going to show to you, and here's how you're going to find for me at the end, or for my client at the end. And then the other side stands up and says, here are actually what the facts are, and here's how you're going to find for my client by the end of this. And so it's a way for each side to tell their story to the jury, and then after they do that, that's when they start calling witnesses to present evidence to build their case against the other side. However, a lot of this scene kind of feels like a criminal trial. Homer's held in a cage. He was held in hell until his trial began, which feels like prison. When you breach a contract like this, you're not going to go to prison for it. You would just get sued by the other side and you'd have to show up to court someday, but you wouldn't be held in a cage during your trial. I mean, you wouldn't be held in a cage even if it was a criminal trial in the United States, but here this is a civil trial. However, there are still juries in civil trials. It's just that the other side isn't treated like a criminal, like Homer is being treated. However, at the end, it is true that you can only contract away the rights that you actually have. So in this situation, if he had already signed away his soul to Marge Simpson through a valid contract, then she is technically the rightful owner of his soul, and therefore Homer did not have the right to contract away his soul to the devil. And so that contract between him and the devil would be unenforceable. Good job, The Simpsons. Alright, well this has been fun and I hope you enjoyed. If you have any other shows you'd like me to ruin by telling you all about the law about them, put them in the comments below. If you found this informational or entertaining, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. Thanks so much for watching. Happy Halloween. Don't forget to vote. Goodbye.